Layla had always been a woman who believed in hard work. In the busy, noisy city of Makonda, she and her husband Jamal started with nothing more than a tiny office, an old truck, and a dream that seemed too big for their pockets. While others slept, she stayed up making calls, writing proposals, and visiting clients. She handled the accounts, chased late payments, and sometimes even helped load goods into the truck when workers didn't show up. Jamal liked to stand in front of clients and talk about his company, but Layla knew every success came from both their sweat. She skipped family events, worked through fevers, and poured her savings into the business when money was short. She wasn't just building a company, she was building their future, one deal at a time. When the first big contract came in, she celebrated with a simple meal at home, grateful for the progress. To Layla, this was more than work. It was love, partnership, and a shared dream. She believed they were a team bound together by the empire they were slowly creating. But little did she know, the same man she had sacrificed for would one day use that dream to break her. The first signs were small, so small that Layla almost convinced herself they didn't matter. First, it was the clothes. Jamal, who used to wear the same faded shirts to meetings, suddenly started buying expensive suits and shiny shoes. He began spending long hours at the tailor, talking about image and presentation. Then it was his voice, not just the tone but the way he spoke. The humble man who once laughed easily now spoke with polished, rehearsed words, as if every sentence was meant to impress. Soon their home was filled with new faces. Wealthy businesspeople, politicians, and glamorous women with perfect makeup started visiting. Jamal would pour them expensive wine and sit for hours, discussing deals and investments while Layla quietly served snacks and refilled glasses. She noticed how he laughed at their jokes more than hers, how his eyes lit up when they praised him. He stopped introducing her as his business partner and simply called her my wife, as if her role in building the company had vanished overnight. When she asked him about the late nights, he brushed it off with a smile. Networking, Layla. This is how big businesses work. But deep inside she could feel something shifting, a space growing between them. He no longer asked for her opinion on contracts. He no longer shared the details of the company's plans. And when she tried to join his new circle, he would gently but firmly suggest she rest or stay home. Layla stayed silent, convincing herself it was just a phase, that success was simply changing their lives and they would adjust. But the truth was, the man she had built her dreams with was slowly stepping into a different world, one where she no longer seemed to fit. And though she didn't want to admit it yet, she could already feel herself being pushed to the edges of a life she had helped create. The night was supposed to be special. Layla had spent hours getting ready for the formal event, choosing a royal blue dress that hugged her figure just right, styling her hair in soft curls, and adding a touch of gold jewelry Jamal had gifted her years ago. She wanted to stand beside her husband with pride, to show the city's elite that they were a team who had risen together. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers, laughter, and music. Layla stood by Jamal's side as he shook hands, exchanged business cards, and introduced himself to important people. She smiled politely, even when she felt out of place in the crowd of perfectly slim women in designer gowns. She thought Jamal would be proud to have her there until it happened. In the middle of a conversation, Jamal leaned in close, his voice low but sharp enough to slice her heart. "You need to lose weight, Layla. You're not the image of a CEO's wife." For a moment she couldn't breathe. His words echoed in her head, louder than the music around them. She blinked hard, willing the tears not to fall in front of strangers. The man who had once admired her strength, her mind, and her beauty was now measuring her worth by the size of her waist. She tried to smile and carry on, but every laugh felt forced, every handshake felt heavy. The rest of the night passed in a blur. She barely tasted the food, barely heard the speeches. All she could feel was the sting of humiliation, the slow crushing of her self-esteem. On the drive home she stared out the window silent. Jamal didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. In that moment Layla realized something had changed forever. It wasn't just about the words he had spoken. It was about what they revealed. He no longer saw her as his partner, his equal, or even his love. He saw her as an accessory, one he believed no longer fit the picture he wanted to paint for the world. The meeting room was one Layla knew better than her own kitchen. She had spent years in that space, drafting contracts, negotiating deals, and mapping out the company's growth on its big whiteboard. That morning, she walked in with her usual folder of notes, ready to discuss a new client proposal. But the atmosphere felt different. Jamal sat at the head of the table in his tailored suit, his expression unreadable. Around him, board members whispered to each other, avoiding her gaze. The meeting began as usual, but halfway through, Jamal cleared his throat. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "From today," he said, "Layla will no longer be involved in the company's operations." Layla froze. She thought she had misheard. "What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't meet her eyes. "We need a more presentable face for the company," he continued, each word like a stone dropping into her chest. The room went silent. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, some filled with pity, others with discomfort. No one spoke up. No one defended her. Her hands trembled under the table. This was the business she had sacrificed for, the dream she had built with him, and he was dismissing her like an unqualified employee. She wanted to scream, to remind them of the nights she worked while he slept, of the contracts she had secured, of the time she had saved the company from collapse. But her voice wouldn't come. Jamal moved on to the next agenda item as if nothing had happened. Layla sat there staring at the table, feeling like a ghost in a room she had once ruled. When the meeting ended, no one looked her in the eye as they filed out. She gathered her notes slowly, her heart heavy, knowing that something far worse than losing her position had just happened. She had lost the respect of the man she once trusted most. And in that moment, she realized the betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. It was brutal. And it was final. The drive home from the office felt like a bad dream Layla couldn't wake up from. She sat in silence, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past, her mind replaying Jamal's words in the boardroom. She thought maybe, just maybe, they would talk about it at home. Maybe he would realize what he'd done and try to explain. But the moment they stepped into the mansion, her hope shattered. Jamal didn't even remove his jacket. He walked straight upstairs, and when Layla followed, she found him in their bedroom, pulling out her clothes from the wardrobe and tossing them into large brown boxes. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. He didn't look at her. "You can't stay here anymore," he said flatly. "It's better for both of us." Her heart pounded. "Better? After everything I've done for you? For us?" He kept folding her dresses without answering. The man she had once shared dreams, struggles, and victories with now treated her like an inconvenience. Something to remove and replace. The sight of her life being packed away in cardboard hit her harder than his words. Every scarf, every pair of shoes, every framed photo felt like a piece of her being stripped away. She wanted to fight, to demand her place in the home she had helped build, but she could see it in his eyes. He had already erased her from his future. Within an hour, her belongings were stacked by the door. The mansion that once felt like their safe place now felt cold, unwelcoming, almost foreign. She picked up the boxes with trembling hands, forcing herself not to cry in front of him. As the door shut behind her, Layla realized she wasn't just losing a husband or a home. She was being thrown out of the very life she had worked so hard to create, discarded like an unwanted guest in a story she had written from the very first page. And that, she thought, was a kind of humiliation no one should ever have to endure. The apartment was small, barely big enough for a bed, a table, and a few boxes stacked in the corner. The paint on the walls was chipped, and the window looked out onto a noisy street. But to Layla, the silence inside was the loudest thing of all. She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the life she had just lost. She remembered the sacrifices, how she had sold her gold jewelry to pay salaries when the company couldn't afford them, how she had skipped meals to save money for fuel, how she had smiled through exhaustion so Jamal wouldn't lose hope. She remembered the nights she sat in that old office, drafting proposals and answering calls while he slept at home, confident she would handle everything. Every detail came back to her. The excitement of winning their first big contract, the way they celebrated with cheap takeout because they couldn't afford anything else, the loan she had taken in her own name when the company was drowning. She had carried their dream on her back when it was too heavy for him, never once thinking she would be carrying it alone in the end. Days blurred into nights in that little apartment. She had no one to talk to, no one to share her pain with. Friends who once called every day were suddenly too busy, and the business circles she had been part of seemed to forget her overnight. Sometimes she'd catch herself checking her phone, half expecting an apology, or at least an acknowledgement from Jamal. But it never came. The only messages were bills and rent reminders. In those lonely days, Layla realized something painful. She had built an entire life around someone who could throw her away without looking back. And now, for the first time in years, she had nothing but herself, and the quiet, empty space where her old life used to be. It was a hot afternoon, and Layla was sitting by the window, sipping a cup of lukewarm tea she'd reheated twice. The room felt unusually still, the kind of stillness that makes time seem slower. She was halfway through reading an old newspaper when a firm knock echoed at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, there stood Chief Adewale, a man she hadn't seen in months. He was one of their biggest clients back when she and Jamal ran the company together. A man of influence with a warm but commanding presence. He wore his usual crisp agbada and a smile that didn't quite hide his curiosity. "Layla," he greeted, his deep voice filling the hallway. "I hear you're no longer with the company." She forced a small smile. "That's true." He shook his head slowly. "That's a shame, you were always the brains. I could tell from the first deal we did. Jamal handled the talking, but you handled the real work." Her chest tightened. Those words, simple, honest, felt like water on dry ground. In weeks of silence and humiliation, no one had acknowledged her worth. And here was someone who saw it clearly. Chief Adewale stepped inside, glancing around the modest apartment. He didn't seem to care about the peeling walls or the worn-out furniture. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting from casual to serious. "Tell me, Layla, have you thought about starting something of your own?" She laughed softly, almost bitterly. "With what money?" Adewale's eyes twinkled. "Sometimes money follows the right mind. I have a project, a big one, and I want you to run it. Not for Jamal. For yourself." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. No one had offered her anything since she lost everything. Now, standing in her small, quiet apartment, she felt the first spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Layla sat across from Chief Adewale at the small wooden table in her apartment, still trying to believe what she had just heard. He was offering her a contract, not just any contract, but a major delivery project that could change everything. She had managed projects like this before, but always under Jamal's name, always with his signature on the papers. This time Adewale made it clear. The business would be hers completely. "I want to see what you can do without him," he said, his voice firm but encouraging. "You've always been the one with the ideas, the planning, the discipline. Jamal was just the face." Those words lit something inside her, a small but powerful flame. For weeks, she had been drowning in self-doubt, feeling invisible and discarded. Now someone was telling her she was the real force all along. Still, fear crept in. She had no office, no trucks, no team. She had nothing but her name and her experience. "I don't know if I can," she admitted quietly. Adewale leaned back and smiled knowingly. "You can. I've seen you do more with less. I'll give you the first payment up front. Hire your people. Get the equipment. Prove me right." His faith in her was both terrifying and thrilling. She imagined her name on a business card, her signature on the contracts, her decisions shaping the future. For the first time since losing everything, she felt like she could breathe again. When he left, Layla sat alone in the apartment, staring at the blank notepad on the table. Slowly, she began to write. Possible team members, trusted drivers, old contacts she could call. Each name on that list felt like a step toward something new. She didn't know exactly how she would do it, but she knew one thing. This was her chance to rebuild. Not for Jamal. Not for anyone else. This time it would be for her. Layla threw herself into the work like a woman on a mission. She started by calling the few people she trusted. An old driver who had been loyal from the early days. A sharp young accountant she once mentored. And a logistics manager who had left Jamal's company quietly months before. They all said the same thing when she told them her plan. "If it's you leading, we're in." With the advance payment from Chief Adewale, she rented a modest office space on the edge of Makonda's industrial district. It wasn't fancy, just 2 rooms with peeling paint and a buzzing ceiling fan, but to Layla, it felt like the headquarters of a future empire. She bought 2 used trucks, polished them until they gleamed, and painted the name she had chosen in bold blue letters, Makonda Freight Solutions. The early days were hard. She worked from sunrise until long past midnight, managing every detail herself. negotiating prices, handling clients, even helping load goods when they were short on staff. She skipped meals, ignored exhaustion, and lived on determination alone. Every completed delivery, every satisfied client, felt like a personal victory. Word began to spread. Old clients remembered how reliable she had been and started reaching out. One contract turned into 2, then 5. Within months, Maconda Freight Solutions was handling shipments larger than anything she had ever managed under Jamal's shadow. Sometimes she would catch herself smiling at the thought. The same people who once thought she was just the wife were now seeking her out for business. She had her name on the paperwork, her signature on the deals, and her face on the brand. Her office wall slowly filled with framed contracts and thank you letters from clients. Every time she looked at them, she felt a quiet pride. She hadn't just rebuilt her life. She had created something bigger, stronger, and entirely her own. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. It started as small talk in the business circles Jamal loved to be part of. Over dinner tables and at networking events, people began mentioning a new company in Maconda that was making waves, Maconda Freight Solutions. At first, Jamal didn't think much of it. But then he started hearing the name of it, so Layla. The first time he heard it, he laughed it off. Impossible, he said. But the whispers kept coming and they grew louder. Clients who used to sign with him were now choosing her. Some even told him directly, Layla's team is faster, more reliable. Stung. He started noticing the change in his own office. Contracts were fewer, meetings shorter, the energy low. Some of his best employees had left, and he didn't need to ask where they had gone. The numbers on the monthly reports told the truth. His business was slowing down. One evening, sitting alone in his big, empty office, Jamal overheard 2 junior staff talking in the hallway. She's really good, one of them said. You can tell she knows her stuff. She's not like other CEOs. She actually works. He didn't need to ask who they were talking about. The words too fat and ugly, the ones he had thrown at her so carelessly, came back to him like a slap. The woman he had discarded was now running a company bigger than his, earning the respect he thought only he deserved. Pride kept him from admitting it out loud, but deep inside, a knot of regret began to form. He had underestimated her, thinking her worth was tied to how she looked. Now she was proving to the whole city, and to him, that her worth had never needed his approval. And that was a truth far harder to swallow than any business loss. The Maconda Business Excellence Gala was the biggest night of the year, a gathering of the city's most powerful entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders. The grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed tables, and the soft hum of live music. Cameras flashed as guests in designer gowns and sharp suits mingled, exchanging business cards and practiced smiles. Then the doors opened and all at once the room seemed to pause. Layla stepped in. She wore a floor-length emerald gown with gold embroidery that caught the light like fire. Her hair was swept elegantly back, her skin glowing, her eyes calm but confident. Every step she took echoed with quiet authority. People turned to look, some in admiration, some in surprise, and a few in awe. Photographers moved in quickly, their cameras clicking in rapid bursts. Industry leaders whispered her name to each other, some nudging their companions. That's her, someone murmured. The CEO of Maconda Freight Solutions. Across the room, Jamal stood mid-conversation, a glass of champagne in his hand. The moment his eyes found her, he froze. For a second, it was as if the noise around him vanished. He saw the woman he had once told wasn't presentable enough now commanding the attention of the entire room. She didn't look at him immediately. Instead, she greeted other guests with warm smiles, shaking hands, speaking with grace and poise. When her gaze finally met his, it wasn't the look of someone seeking revenge or approval. It was the look of someone who had moved beyond him completely. Someone who knew her worth. The music swelled, conversations resumed, and Layla continued to glide through the room like she belonged there. Because she did. And for Jamal, standing there with his pride crumbling, the sight was almost too much to bear. Jamal waited until Layla was standing alone near the edge of the ballroom, a glass of sparkling water in her hand. She was listening to the music, her posture relaxed, her confidence radiating in a way that made it hard for him to approach without feeling small. Still, he straightened his suit jacket and walked over, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Layla, he said smoothly, as if their last conversation hadn't been months of silence and betrayal. "You look well." She gave him a polite nod, her face unreadable. "Thank you." He hesitated, then leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "You know, maybe we could work together again. Combine our strengths. Like before." For a brief moment he thought she might actually consider it. But then Layla's lips curved into a small cold smile, the kind that said she had already written the ending to this chapter. "I don't work for men who measure worth in waistlines," she said, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the noise around them. Jamal's smile faltered. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She didn't give him the chance to recover. With a graceful turn, Layla walked away, her gown sweeping the floor behind her, leaving him standing there with his pride in pieces. As she moved toward a group of top executives who welcomed her warmly, Jamal felt the sting of her words more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just rejection. It was a reminder that she no longer needed him, in business or in life. And as the night went on, she never looked his way again. Later that night, the lights dimmed and the host announced Layla's name. She walked to the stage with steady steps, her emerald gown shimmering under the spotlight. The room was filled with Makonda's most influential people, but at that moment all eyes belonged to her. She took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone and began. "I've learned something in the last year," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's not the titles, the suits, or the photographs in glossy magazines that define success. It's hard work. It's resilience. It's the ability to keep building when the ground beneath you crumbles." The room was silent, hanging on her every word. "I also learned," she continued, "that we live in a world where women are often judged more by how they look than by what they can do. I've been told I wasn't the right image. I've been told I wasn't enough. But I stand here tonight as proof that our value is not in our waistlines, our skin, or the way we fit into someone else's vision. Our value is in what we create, in the lives we impact, and in the courage to rise when we're pushed down." A few heads nodded in agreement and soon, the whole room was clapping softly, building into loud applause. "So to every woman listening," Layla said, her eyes sweeping the crowd, "never let anyone make you feel small. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Your worth is yours to decide, and no one can take it from you unless you hand it over." When she finished, the audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the hall. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and for a moment, Layla felt the pure sweetness of victory. Not just over Jamal, but over every doubt, every insult, every closed door she had ever faced. And somewhere in the crowd, Jamal sat silently, realizing he wasn't just watching a speech. He was watching the woman he had underestimated become unstoppable. In the weeks after the gala, Layla's story began to spread far beyond the ballroom. It started with a few social media posts, photos of her in the emerald and gold gown, clips of her powerful speech. Soon those posts were being shared across Makonda, then across the country. Young women watched and whispered to each other, "Did you hear what she said? Did you see what she's built?" Her name became a symbol of strength. In cafes, markets, and hair salons, people repeated the story. How she had been pushed out of her own company, thrown out of her home, and told she wasn't the right image, only to rise again and outshine the man who doubted her. Mothers told their daughters, "Be like Layla." Not because she left a man, but because she believed in herself when no one else did. Some young women started small businesses, using her story as fuel. Others went back to school, deciding they would no longer wait for someone else's approval to chase their dreams. A few even reached out to Layla directly, sending messages that read, "You gave me courage to try," or "Because of you, I know I can start over." Layla didn't see herself as a hero, but she couldn't ignore the ripple effect. She had set a new standard, not just for women in business, but for anyone who had been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside. In a world that often measured worth in shallow ways, she had proven that skill, determination, and heart could outshine any perfect image. And the best part? She knew the young women watching her wouldn't just follow her path. They would go further, dream bigger, and rise higher. Every time she heard her story being told, Layla felt a quiet pride. Not for the fame or recognition, but for the fact that she had turned her pain into a roadmap for others to find their own strength. Layla's life no longer looked anything like the one she had before, and she wouldn't have wanted it to. Her company was thriving, her name was respected in boardrooms and markets alike, and she could walk into any room with her head high, knowing she had earned her place there. She didn't just win back her dignity. She built a life where no one could take it away again. She was richer now, not just in money, but in wisdom and self-worth. She had learned who she was without the shadows of someone else's approval. People sought her advice, invited her to speak at events, and trusted her with opportunities that once would have gone to others. And while the success felt good, what mattered most to her was the freedom to make her own choices, to build on her own terms, to live without fear of being not enough. As for Jamal, his story was whispered in business circles as a warning. Don't make the mistake he did, people would say. Never underestimate the person building beside you. His company had shrunk, his reputation faded, and the man who once stood so proudly in the spotlight now watched from the sidelines. Layla didn't need revenge. She didn't need to prove anything to him anymore. She had already done the greatest thing she could. She had risen higher than he ever imagined. And now she wore her crown with grace, knowing she had placed it there herself.